Mask matched her shirt.
Oh, the runway models have masks that match their outfit.
Yeah.
They're just,
Yeah.
all right.
So I saw there's a company that makes masks where they take a photo of your face and
Our budget hearings, and up next is District Attorney. You're on.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am DA Mike Kege. I'm here before you today with my budget request for 2021. With your permission, I will begin by highlighting both the responsibilities we have within the law and the work that we have done to fulfill those duties. The Shawnee County District Attorney's Office is responsible for the charging and prosecution of all violations of state law and some county law that occur within the jurisdictional limits of Shawnee County. We handle a wide variety of cases, including adult and juvenile offender cases, child in need of care, asset forfeiture, and care and treatment. We're also responsible for investigating violations of the Kansas Open Meetings and Open Records Acts. It is the mission of my office to carry out these responsibilities in an organized, efficient, and ethical manner and pursue justice and public safety for our community as a whole. The professionalism, dedication, and commitment of my staff are second to none. I've been up here saying that every year, but this year I have proof. One of my deputies, Brett Watson, was named Prosecutor of the Year and is the Prosecutor of the Year according to the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association. That's a statewide association of prosecutors without any influence or voting privileges from this county, selected one of ours as the best in the state. And that's something I'm very proud of. And that's something Shawnee County can be proud of as well. I have many other talented prosecutors in my office, and I'm hoping that we're going to win back-to-back trophies, kind of like my favorite football team is trying to do this year. After 3+ years as the DA, I can unequivocally say we are operating at peak efficiency. We handle more cases each year with fewer staff and resources than our peers around the state, and I am very proud of that. The closest comparison I can offer to you in terms of relative size is Wyandotte County and the Wyandotte County DA's office. That office handles only 75% of the number of felonies that we have here in Shawnee County, and yet their budget is $1.5 million higher every year. I understand this is a tough year to ask for an increase, and I would not do it unless it was absolutely necessary. The first request I'd like to make is funding for a project manager to oversee our new group violence intervention program. For too long, we have been losing lives, many of them young lives, to senseless violence. This intervention program is designed to save those lives and to reduce violence in our community. Rather than give you all of the details myself, I have invited 3 speakers to share their perspectives on the importance of the program. First, I will ask Lindsay Anderson with the Topeka Center for Peace and Justice to summarize the program itself and the need for this position. Then I have asked Michelle Stubblefield with the Greater Topeka Partnership to share a community perspective. Finally, I have invited Chief Cochran to describe the potential impact of this program on community safety.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. About the program, in the early 1990s in Boston, the National Network for Safe Communities out of John Jay College in New York pioneered an evidence-based strategy to reduce homicide and gun violence, minimize harm to communities by replacing enforcement with deterrence, and foster strong relationships between law enforcement and the people they serve. This strategy is known as Group Violence Intervention, or GVI for short. Since GVI was first implemented in Boston, dozens of challenging cities across the United States, such as Chicago, Detroit, and New Orleans, have implemented the GVI model and shown by demonstration that violence can be dramatically reduced when community members join together with law enforcement and social services, along with the community, to provide a focus on anti-violence message. With the GVI model, violence can be dramatically reduced when a partnership of community members, law enforcement, and social service providers directly engage with small and active members of people involved in violence to clearly communicate a credible moral message against violence, along with notice about the consequences of further violence and a genuine offer to help those who want it. The aim of GVI strategy is to reduce peer dynamic in a group that promotes violence by creating collective accountability, fostering internal social pressure that deters violence, establish clear community standards against violence, offer group members an honorable exit from committing acts of violence, and to provide a supportive path for those who want a change. GVI combines the best of law enforcement and community-driven approaches to improve public safety, minimize arrests and incarcerations, and foster police-community reconciliation. With the implementation of GVI, communities can effectively address many other serious problems when they operate along a common set of guiding principles. First, do no harm. Second, strengthen communities' capacity to prevent violence. Third, enhance legitimacy. Fourth, offer help to those who want it. Fifth, get deterrence right. And last, use enforcement strategically. By following these principles, group violence intervention has produced powerful and measurable results. It is, at its core, a straightforward approach, identifying the groups that drive the violence and form a partnership among law enforcement, communities, and social service providers that communicate a united message to members of those in the target groups. With violent crimes continuing to rise in Topeka and Shawnee County, directly compromising the health and safety of our citizens, this group of key stakeholders have come together in our community and are committed to building the community's capacity to prevent violence, build relationships with law enforcement, and help the most vulnerable people using the group violence intervention model.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Michelle Stubblefield, Greater Topeka Partnership, today representing the board of SAVE. GVI is a proven relationship-focused, community-driven effort to reduce homicides and gun violence, minimize harm to communities by initiating focused deterrence and intervention, fostering stronger relationships between law enforcement, the community, and group members. How? Because key trusted community members are involved. They understand and are engaged with those who are living those struggles, obstacles, and can be honest in their approach on how to deal with the dynamics of confrontation. As you've heard from Lindsay, strategies against violence everywhere will work by reducing peer dynamics in the group that promote violence and by creating collective accountability, by fostering internal social pressure that deters violence, by establishing clear community standards against violence and communicate the consequences of those actions, offering its members and such groups an honorable and respected way to stop committing violent acts, providing a support path and resources to bring about meaningful change in our individual level, on an individual level, and by the emergence of police and community reconciliation and partnerships toward sustaining success of GVI. These methods are community-driven. They are in part with private, public, and organizations, social services, all working towards the same model. This method empowers the community with strategies to stop the violence before it occurs. It is proactive and engages the moral voice of the community. Now, this moral voice is a key component to GVI success by one's ability to speak to community aspirations and growth and change. Experience of GVI shows that cities can achieve striking results, results that everyone can agree on. The goal is to reduce violence, improve law enforcement, community relations, and better the quality of life in our most vulnerable neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
The County Commissioners, it's a privilege and an honor to be here in front of you today. I also think it's a very bold move that the DA is making a request for an increase in his budget. We all are aware of the times, and we're going through the budget process ourselves. I know the difficulty. But one of the great things about this program that we're here to talk about today, it actually is a community-driven program. It's a community-driven effort. And speaking of that, we've already raised considerable funds to make the program work. We are now at a point where to put this over the top, to put this into action, and actually improve the quality of life for all the citizens of Topeka and Shawnee County, we need a project manager. And the project manager is going to be that individual that will facilitate how this program works, how we're going to meet with young people to reduce potential violent crimes in the future, and how do we work with them to be productive citizens within our community. My primary focus for us as law enforcement is how do we intervene in these violent tendencies that young people have before they actually commit a violent crime. And that's where this program is going to be very vital to the community of Shawnee County. With this project manager, we'll have that individual that's going to be able to monitor cases, review cases, and also set up what we call call-ins, where we bring people in to have conversations, to intervene in this young person's life before they get too far down the wrong path. The best thing we got in this partnership is it's a community effort. I can't stress that enough. We have tons of community partners, and we can get you that list if you'd like to see all of them. But everybody has stepped up to the plate, pitched in, and said, okay, we need to make a difference in our community. And that's where we're at. With this project manager that the DA is requesting, it is, to me, the next to the last step to get this implemented. We are working with the national network. We're providing them with resources. We're providing them with statistics. We're providing them with lots of coordinating material. But now we need that last piece to put this over the edge to make us go down the right path. And it's a privilege to be able to speak on behalf of the DDA on this request, and hopefully you'll find it as a position that's needed to make this program successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I want to take a moment and rewind the clock to 2017, a year that I hope none of us ever see the like of again in terms of the violence and the number of homicides we had. It was very troubling to me. It was my first year as the DA, and part of me wondered, what's going to happen next. I started thinking, how can we be proactive? How can we keep this from happening again? and I was doing some research on my own. And it was around that time that I was contacted by members of Topeka Jump, including Madison, who's here today. I'd like to thank them all for coming out and supporting this request and being here at this hearing. And they outlined this strategy to me. And I said, well, what's my role? And they said, well, you just have to participate and then, do your job. And if they break the law, then you enforce the law. And I said, sounds great. I'm in. I think we have the potential here to really make an impact, especially on the youth in this community. And if I thought we didn't have that potential, and if I thought this was not worth our time, I would not be up here in front of you talking about it right now. I think this is something we have to do. The community has stepped up in a big way already. You can see the kind of support we have in the community, and this is just a glimpse, really. And how much is a life worth? How much are multiple lives worth? So with that, before everyone starts to disperse, the ones that are here specifically for this issue, I'd like to ask if the commissioners have questions on anything that they've heard so far, and if you have any questions for me.
How does this program work? How, does it work through the schools? Does it, how do you intervene in these kids' lives? How does it start?
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. I think it's as unique and as specific as it needs to be, depending on who you're trying to make contact with, who you have a concern about. I think it's dangerous, and I don't take this approach in my office. I think it's dangerous to kind of say, well, we have rigid categories and this is the only way it works. I think you have to be creative and think outside the box. Certainly this whole program stands for that proposition, right? When's the last time you had law enforcement in here asking for anything like this? Before we start talking about this, had any of us ever actually heard of a program like this? This is the very definition of being creative and trying to find a solution to a long-standing problem.
Yes.
Do we know what the contribution from the city is going to be for this? Are they going to be able to be a partner on this at all? Or is this going to be entirely on Shawnee County for our participation?
Well, Commissioner, frankly, the community has already stepped up, and in large part the city of Topeka. Now, I know what your question is. Your question is, has city government stepped up?
Mm-hmm.
To this point, I'm not aware of any specific commitment, but I know there's a willingness and an interest there to support the work that we're doing.
And I don't discount the program at all, and I think that it's gotten some great results in other communities. My question is more towards, it looks like it's going to be really focused in on working with, a lot of it's going to be the Topeka Police Department and Topeka, PD working with the community, less so than the sheriff's office, and then also trying to figure out where your office, what role your office is going to play. Is it going to be mainly, I guess, what is the role that your office would have in this project?
To participate, to cooperate, to support. I've been a member of the SAVE Executive Committee since day one.
Okay.
I've supported this from the beginning,
But-
and I have a duty. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, and I'm sorry to interject, but project for me what that would be. You would have an ADA on site, on scene? Are you going to have a person who is working as an intermediary between the Topeka Police and your office? What exactly is the role with the DA's office in the program?
Well, we're talking about funding for a project manager, and that funding would be from my budget. So this person would actually work for me,
Okay.
right? They're supporting the program, they're directing the program. I don't think it gets any more hands-on than that.
Okay. Why is the program coming through your office as opposed through TPD's office? And again, I'm just, because this is a great program.
It's a community-based program, to answer your question. Think about the optics for a second.
Okay.
And I know you're very familiar with what we're talking about.
Right.
Is this a police program? is this the cops trying to, put on a different spin right now? That's not it. This is a community program, and it requires everyone to step in and do their part. That's law enforcement, that's prosecutors, that's faith leaders in the community, everyone that's here today.
Why not have it administered through Jump then, as opposed through your office? And aren't we gonna have the same optics potentially? Because a lot of times your office is the one who is putting people in jail, or, because your job is to ensure the safety of the community. And so are we gonna have a different optics? And again, I think it's a great program, and I'm just trying to, in my mind,
This is
get the maximum benefit.
a means to enhance that community safety. I'm aware of what my responsibilities are.
Okay, yeah,
That's why I'm here.
good.
That's why I support this program. You
Is-
just made my point for me.
You say it's a community driven thing. Is the community the whole county or just city of Topeka, or what
The
do you?
community is the whole county,
Okay.
and I'm responsible for clearly everything that happens within the
Good.
county, as we discussed at the beginning. If something violent happens out in the county or in the city tonight, I'm the one that gets the phone call. I'm the one charged with ensuring public safety for this entire county.
Commissioner Mays?
Yeah, I support the program. I think it's important that this project manager is independent of law enforcement. The people that they're going to be working with typically, I would say, have a distrust of law enforcement. And so it's important that they're independent of that. And again, we go back to the potential cost savings as well. So this position costs money, but we're talking about right now, a high-profile murder case that's going to cost us probably, what, $250,000 to prosecute?
Sure.
I mean, it pays for itself if we can prevent any more murders from happening. And, anecdotally, one of the things that I've heard from a couple of people is, we talk a lot about COVID right now, and I've heard somebody say, oh, more people got murdered in Shawnee County last year than died of COVID. And so, when I hear something like that, it's like, well, what can we do to stop it? Let's be creative. Let's come up with some new ways of addressing it.
And Commissioner, I think that's a very valid point. We shut down the entire state because of COVID. And I understand it's a controversial area. I'm not trying to get into that right now. But we shut down our county too. At what cost? At what cost to our local businesses? And we're talking about a position that costs $50,000 plus benefits in order to make this a viable program, in order to start implementation now. How is that not worth it?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
in your office right now, we have a person who does a lot of outreach and interaction in the community as a liaison. Is there any way that we could take that person's position and adapt it to this program, where they would be in charge of this program then?
You're asking if my Director of Community Engagement could instead become the project manager for this?
Right, and
I don't
guess,
believe so.
Are they duplicating the same types of jobs?
Not
or is
even
it a
remotely.
completely different job?
Not even remotely. That's a part-time position designed to develop community outreach, which I have an ethical responsibility to do. It's important that the public understands the nature of the work we're doing, and that they have trust in the work that we do in enforcing the law. That's a part-time position. This is a full-time position, and I think
I mean,
that's saying conservatively. In a lot of communities, they have a project manager, and then they have a case manager working under that project manager. So I'm just asking for the one position. And I understand what you're saying, but there would be no duplication of efforts. Waste and inefficiency is offensive to me. So if there was a possibility to do that, I would be doing that already.
I just know that your Director of Community Engagement is a very engaging, very charismatic, very tied into the community.
Sure.
And would have a lot of those abilities and contacts, and I think that he could be a great resource for the program if he.
I think he will be a great resource for the program, but not as the project manager.
How are these kids identified? Are these kids that are in the court system now, or where do you find these kids?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I can offer my thoughts, or I can defer to Chief on this
All
one.
right.
We've had a lot of conversation about it.
So, first, part of the commitment from the city, one of the things that we are looking at is fiscal year '22, after we get through '21. Part of the way the program works is we have these mentors that are identified that are been involved in our community. Some of them have done some time in correctional facilities. And so the hopes are that they can be mentors on the positive end to say, hey, this is not the way to go. And so these young people that are going to be identified and individuals that will be identified, when we work a lot of our calls, whether they're violent crimes, traffic stops, in and around those or whatever, young people and other people are identified as always being in the area. You can pick out a number of individuals that their name shows up all the time in police reports as a witness or just being in the area but not being involved in the crime. And so those individuals are identified as high-risk individuals for potentiality of violence. And so when they get identified, the GVI group will then contact those individuals, their parents, and bring them together. And a lot of times law enforcement or the DA's office aren't going to be involved in those conversations because, as Mr. Mays pointed out, the trust for law enforcement. And so that's where these mentors and the Center for Peace and Justice come into play, is to mentor, educate, intervene on behalf of everybody in Shawnee County. But the way that most of those individuals are going to be identified is from being associated with individuals who are involved in crimes. And those are areas we have to be very careful of, and we know that legally in talking with our legal staff as well. But those are things, how a lot of those individuals are going to be identified. They can also be identified by the school system. You know, if you have a schools counselor that says, Bill Cochran, he's always in trouble, he's getting worse or whatever, can contact us and we can intervene on that behalf as well, call the parents in. And so, you know, as the DA said, it comes from a variety of different places. There's no cookie-cut pattern for it. But it's also one of those things that it's a widespread net that can be cast. And the whole purpose of it, like it is to identify those individuals before they get down that path. And like I said, we can provide names and stuff like that. We can identify those individuals that always seem to be in and around activity when it happens, but not particularly involved, or they're related to somebody that's involved. And so if we can intervene on their behalf before they get to that point, then that's where we're going to be successful.
All right.
Any other questions on this?
Any questions? No.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you, everyone, for being here.
Maybe if we have citizens that want to speak, should we just wait till after the end of the hearing for that?
Yeah, just to make sure we have that time. All right. Thank you, Commissioners. The next request I am making is funding for a human trafficking investigator. Recent years have brought to light the terrifying reality that human trafficking is not only happening in our own country, but in our own community. This has a direct impact on public safety. Human trafficking often leads to many other crimes, including rape, all forms of violence, drug trafficking and addiction, and kidnapping, to name a few. My office has successfully convicted every human trafficker that we had the opportunity to prosecute, but those case referrals remain elusive. Human traffickers use both sophisticated and brutal methods to control and manipulate their victims. Traditional investigations yield mixed results. I am basing this request on a very successful program currently in operation in the Denver DA's office. I've been communicating with them for several months on this project. By using their own investigators and subpoena power, they're able to collect documents and build a paper trail that follows the money driving the human trafficking business. The resulting prosecutions, while still victim-centered, do not rise and fall on a victim's memory or willingness to participate. I have asked Michelle McCormick, now of the Attorney General's Office, to provide a snapshot of human trafficking and those operations within our community. Afterwards, I will invite Barry Feeker of the Topeka Rescue Mission to share his unique perspective on human trafficking.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Michelle McCormick. I'm the State's Victim Rights Coordinator for the state of Kansas and also the Director of Victim Services at the Office of the Attorney General. Prior to that, though, I was the Program Director at the YWCA Center for Safety and Empowerment, and so I'll be speaking about both of those experiences. So I wanted to first tell you that the state of Kansas has been taking the issue of human trafficking quite seriously for some time now. In 2010, the Attorney General formed the State Human Trafficking Advisory Board. And I can tell you, like many people at that time, I didn't even think human trafficking existed. In fact, my perspective was sort of based on what I was seeing in the media. And I thought of human trafficking as victims who were chained up in foreign brothels or child soldiers in third world countries. And that kind of stuff just didn't happen here. And by 2010, I had been a victim advocate for 12, 13 years. So I had over a decade of training in the area of domestic violence and sexual violence and a lot of experience recognizing victimization. And human trafficking was just in one of my blind spots. I just didn't believe it was happening here. But I became intimately aware of what human trafficking looks like here in Topeka and Shawnee County during my time as the director of the YWCA's program. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what it really looks like here. And so I was supervising staff, the staff who were directly serving victims, and also worked directly with victims myself in that role. And also was a part of a couple of coalitions that were formed in our community in order to assess the prevalence of this issue and really try to figure out what solutions we could come up with to serve the victims and also hold the perpetrators accountable. And so I can tell you a few key points that I've learned in the last 4 years that I want you to know is that I can confirm that both labor and sex trafficking are happening here in our community. And our typical methods of measuring prevalence, like the DA mentioned, just aren't capturing how significant this issue is. And it's for a variety of complex reasons. These victims are really hesitant to come forward and make police reports because of the threats they're experiencing. It's important to remember that they aren't just facing one perpetrator, like a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault is. They have the trafficker, they have the network of traffickers, they have the buyers, they have a whole group of people who are creating danger for them. And so they're terrified. They don't trust a lot of folks. And so they don't come forward and engage our systems in the traditional way. I've seen labor trafficking in the form of young people who are doing like door-to-door magazine sales, and they get trapped in sort of what we call a debt bondage scheme, where they just can't ever earn enough money in order to pay back the person who's holding them in that employment situation. And all of these situations have in common that somebody's using force, fraud, or coercion in order to keep that person sort of trapped in the situation. And then most of my experience is in working with sex trafficking victims. And again, it doesn't look like what it is in the movies. And so I saw everything from the extremes, right? Like I worked with a victim who got invited to a party. She's drugged while she's at the party. And then she spends the next few days in and out of consciousness as she's being drugged over and over again repeatedly, and has memories of also being raped by many different men during that time period, right? And then she's sort of trapped in their network. I've seen youth victims who were impoverished, and they were being promised a place to stay and have food provided for them as long as they were providing sex to the person who was offering them shelter. We called that survival sex, but that meets the definition of human trafficking in our state. We worked with a 17-year-old whose boyfriend who became her trafficker, basically started requiring her to prostitute and threatened to kill her mother and her little brother if she didn't continue to do so. And then I've worked with an adult victim of domestic violence whose husband, in order to continue feeding his drug addiction, required her to sell herself and said that if she didn't continue doing that, he was going to provide sex videos to her employer in order to get her fired. So these scenarios that I'm describing for you, they aren't what's being shown in Hollywood, right? These aren't the pictures that we're thinking of when we say the term human trafficking, but this is in fact what human trafficking looks like in our community. And so during state fiscal year 2019, the YWCA, we served 77 victims of human trafficking. The following fiscal year in 20, which, by the way, this is the first 3 quarters because that just ended in March of this year, the YWCA served 185 victims of human trafficking. And we think that the numbers increased so significantly because of a lot of the community awareness that you probably have seen happen in the last year. But obviously that's more than doubled. And also we started offering additional services, like the YWCA opened up a day center for victims of trafficking. In a third of those cases, the victim was trafficked by their boyfriend or their spouse or their partner, right? So the idea, I think people get scared of the idea of like, well, who's trafficking people? Who are these scary folks? And a third of the time here locally, it was the partner, spouse, or significant other who was doing it. At the Attorney General's office, we also collect statistics statewide, and we find that 80% of the time the victim is trafficked by a family member, which includes spouse or significant other. So I'll conclude and let Barry get up and talk, but I just want to say that I urge you to support any program that is serving victims of human trafficking, but also tackling the issue from the perspective of addressing the perpetrators. And we're just going to have to get more creative than our usual solutions in order to do that. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts here. The saying that the eyes cannot see what the mind does not understand or comprehend is kind of what Michelle was referring to, I think, in that her eyes were really open to trafficking. My eyes were open to trafficking when we began to understand what we'd seen before us for a long time. I've been working with the rescue mission now for 3.5 decades. A number of years ago, I began to look at things a bit differently in regards to a number of people that came to us who had very strange stories. I think today we don't see those stories as strange because of cases like Jeffrey Epstein. The fact is that this does happen. It does happen here too. When we began to dive into the issue of trafficking and see what we could do about it at the rescue mission level, I became very frustrated. Knowing that the traffickers had an extreme upper hand on any of our systems. Traffickers had extreme upper hand on the exploitation of the vulnerable. Trafficking is simply this, exploitation of vulnerability. We have a lot of it, not just homeless, not just poor, but people in our society who are looking for some identification, somebody to encourage them, somebody to give them some type of direction. So basically the market was wide open and had been. In 2018, February 1st, the Kansas legislature took a bold step, both in the House and the Senate, to declare war on human trafficking in Kansas, making it the first state in the nation to do so. On April 5th, Topeka and Shawnee County followed suit with the state to declare war on human trafficking. Commissioner Cook sponsored that on the county side. Then City Council Member Mays, you were involved from the city side on this to take a bold step, really making Topeka, Shawnee County the first city and county in the nation to do so. Unfortunately, the war still rages. We've learned a lot about this war. We've learned a lot about the systems of trafficking, how it's not just localized, how it is national and international. Topeka being a hotbed, Shawnee County being a hotbed because of a number of reasons for trafficking to be here. We did start some pretty significant initiatives to try to bring the community together. Number one, around awareness, and number two, what could we do to address this issue? A war has to have a strategy. That strategy was well underway. Of course, COVID has taken a lot of things and put them on the sidelines for now. But what we did accomplish was beyond just awareness. We accomplished a number of people coming together to say, we think we can do something in our respective areas, whether it be education, law enforcement, social services, the business community, and so forth. What we do know is that we all have our hands full. And there needs to be innovative, unique ways of addressing this issue. When the traffickers can basically do what they do, exploiting the vulnerable, hurting them, then we are left with just responding to the devastation that is in the aftermath of that. Michelle helped us to understand some years ago that the average number of times that a victim of human trafficking, full-time victim of human trafficking is raped is 1,825 times a year. When that's been shared with individuals in the area on a national level, the experts in human trafficking for Homeland Security said that that's not an accurate number. It's at least double that. That's 5 rapes a day for 1 year. Full-time victim of human trafficking, 1,825. What we're left with, if we don't address the why, we don't address the how we're going to combat this, we're left with devastation of individuals that are almost irreparable. Not always, but oftentimes it's one of the most difficult people that we can try to assist due to the emotional trauma, psychological trauma, the spiritual trauma, the biochemical trauma, and the neurological damage that's done. As one example, we had a victim of trafficking that we were working with at one of our hospitals. When it was time for her to leave, we were in the parking garage of the hospital. Security helped her to come out to make sure that the traffickers wouldn't get her back. We had the trunk open on the car and the back seat open, the door to the back seat, and we said, please get in the back. She crawled into the trunk. We said, you don't need to ride in the trunk. You can get in the back seat. It took the next 2 hours to help her to understand it was okay to be in the back seat because she had spent so much time riding around in a situation of a trunk of a car. That particular kind of damage is almost irreparable. What we have the opportunity to do with District Attorney Kagay's research and with his commitment, and with the county's commitment, with the city's commitment, with the state's commitment, is really take this war to the next level. And that is to bring a special investigator into the prosecutor's office, to be able to have the frontline experience and opportunities to be able to work with victims, to help them to understand that it's okay to unravel their testimonies, and to be able to truly address this issue of the traffickers and what they're doing, and help them to understand it's not okay here. So I think we're on the right track. I visited with the district attorney on this. I think he's done his due diligence, and I'm in 100% support of what he's attempting to do to not just talk about this, but walk it out and make something happen that will really, truly make a difference for many, many people, not only now, for years to come in our community. Any questions?
None.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Any questions for me on the reasons behind this request or the request itself?
No.
No.
No? Okay. All right. You're welcome to stay, but we're going to move on to the next thing. Thank you for being here. Thank you. My final request for you to consider today, Commissioners, is to fund another attorney position. The first 2 requests were to create new positions in the office. This is simply to fund an attorney position. We've been very successful in creating a unique model for our diversion program. It is dynamic, case-specific, and has a very high rate of success, about 97%. My diversion program was praised in a statewide report as being unique in its application and in its production of better outcomes for our community. The result has been fewer people with unnecessary convictions and more of them getting treatment and support for the underlying issues driving their behavior. Thanks to our work, Shawnee County is already a leader in this area. But I'd like to take the next step. The creation of a holistic alternative court system to address the most common issues drawing people into the criminal justice system. This would allow us to fully leverage existing resources in our community and bring them to bear in solving common behavioral issues. Nothing like this program currently exists in the state. My vision is to address common issues like mental health, drug addiction, domestic violence, and DUIs, with multidisciplinary teams invested in addressing those underlying issues, thereby enhancing public safety. This is something I have brought before this commission before. This is something I've pursued since my first year in office. It does require buy-in across the board, from the courts, from defense, and from the community as a whole. I do believe now is the right time to do this. We already have a drug court. It's operating very successfully, and we are currently in the process of developing a veterans court. We're lucky to have the VA here and to have those relationships in place. I think that'll be a fairly easy process. But funding this position would absolutely accelerate that process and move us closer to the alternative court system I've described. And I don't have any guest speakers on that issue. That's just me. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. We were given some direction to discuss capital outlay. I have never really had a capital outlay request in my time as the DA, but I'm going to discuss one now. Our document management system, known as Justware, has an end of life that's June of next year. I have a letter from the Justware people letting us know June 30th of 2021, Justware will cease. So we need to have a document management system in the DA's office. You know, we handle thousands of cases, and we need to have a way to track that down. There is some information, but it's very preliminary information in the budget proposal, and I'm not even here with a specific cost figure for you today. What I can tell you, it's on the low end. What we're looking at right now is on the low end of what's outlined in there. But I found out recently that several other prosecution agencies around the state are also looking at going with the system we are, and we're going to engage in a kind of a collective bargaining approach to see if we can get a group discount. So I don't have a number for you. It's going to be at least $200,000. When I have an actual number, I will be back here in front of this body sharing that information, and we can have that conversation then. For my final topic, space. As Captain Kirk called it, the final frontier. But I'm going to boldly go where we've all been before and just bring up space again. This is something that, you know, we've had this discussion before. I don't need to belabor the point, but I am unfortunately to the point now where if I don't get additional space, I'm going to have to enter into a lease agreement, which is something that I inherited when I took office, something I worked very hard to get away from, because the idea of paying thousands of dollars, thousands of public dollars for leasing a site that is away from the courthouse was kind of ridiculous to me. But at some point, I'm going to have to do what I have to do. So I hope there's a solution for space on the horizon. I'm not sure where we are on that issue, but that's an ongoing concern. I do not want to end on a down note, however. I did want to take some time, and circling back to diversion, to thank this body for their support in our application of those diversion funds throughout the community. They've supported renovations in the courthouse. They've supported the courts themselves in acquisition of new technologies. They've provided support for victims of domestic violence, for the homeless, and last but certainly not least, child victims. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. And with that, any questions for me?
On the space requirements, you know, if we were to add these 3 new jobs that you've asked for, do you have anywhere to put them?
No.
Okay.
No, I
Answers
don't.
that.
Yeah, that's the simple answer. I do not. I already have 2 employees working off-site because I can't put them in my office. I don't have the space.
How much space are you talking about? We're talking about 4 office spaces or?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll take it.
3?
I mean, 4, yeah. Four would put us in a good position for at least the next year and a half,
Okay.
if not longer.
Do you have any remote workers now?
I have 2 that are working off-site because I just don't have the room for them in the office.
Are there positions in your office that are not necessarily going to need to be tied to the courthouse that would be an option for? I mean, we're kind of exploring that right now with a lot of other departments
Right.
of ways that we can create more remote working options.
Not really. We're paper intensive and everything is built around the courthouse. We're not built to be anywhere but here. I mean, we can, you know, if you want to stick us in a different building, we'll drive, we'll do whatever we need to do. My preference obviously would be to have everyone be together, and there's a huge convenience factor to being in the actual courthouse because that's our business, right? We go to court.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay. I know we're not completely out of time. I was asked by Shawnee about a comment from the public. I'm not sure what the parameters are for a hearing like this, but there's at least one member of the public who would like to address the commission. I guess with the time remaining,
We've
I'll
done it
leave
in
it
the
to you.
past, we've allowed the public to comment at the end of a presentation if there was time remaining.
Okay.
Seems totally appropriate.
Okay.
We're good?
All right. Well then, I'm done. And, yeah. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I appreciate the time to speak. I'm Pastor Lorna Bowden from Tecumseh United Methodist Church. I'm also a member of Topeka Jump. And as you've heard, our community this year has experienced a great deal of loss. As we think about Emerson Downing and Deshaun Alston and Kelly Parker Sr. and D'Angelo Payne, Mark Edwards, Zenny Vassar Jr., Joseph Hill, Lisa Hill, Joheem Meredith, Terry Tigner, and Ricardo Rodriguez. These are people that have been taken from us just this year due to gun violence. We also recognize the COVID-19 hurdle that everyone has been impacted by, and that has affected our community as well. But we also know that violence is an old problem that just hasn't disappeared, and it continues to devastate us. In fact, at Tecumseh, we still feel the loss of John Waller, who was murdered in Topeka in 2019. So we've looked to do something a little different, and that's what DA Kage has talked about. You all have heard our presentation on it, and we are so grateful for the DA and his putting in money into his budget to get that project manager, which is what we need. We understand your concerns also about putting it in the county. But let me give you some data that was given to us from the Shawnee County Corrections. And we learned that in 2018, there were 28 people arrested on murder charges. And just the pretrial incarceration in the Shawnee County Jail was $923,700 for those 28 people. It's about $33,000 per person. That doesn't include any prosecution costs or services or investigation time, and it doesn't include the holding of people who were involved in non-fatal shootings. So we believe that even though this is within the county budget for this project manager, once it's successful, you're going to see it pay for itself very, very quickly. And so we believe that investing in SAVE is the right thing to do, and it will save the county money. And we think you can't get much better than that, if to spend a little to save a lot. And I will also tell you that clergy are deeply involved from the county and the community in this program, and will be continuing to be involved in the program itself. And I just want to add one more thing that I thought of just actually this morning. And once this program sees success, maybe Shawnee County, Topeka, might be an example for other cities and counties across our state as we witness continued gun violence in this nation. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Mike Calhoun. I am a member of Jump and the street team, and I kind of want to talk to you about an opportunity that we kind of been talking about a little bit already with GBI, and in the back end and making it worth with everybody being able to have the back end like we had DARE program. I remember Chief Cochran when I was a 5th grader. Okay, and Chief Cochran came into my classroom at Holland Park North, and I grew up at Holland Park. I grew up in East Topeka, and plain and simple, I was just kind of I'm frustrated because we have the opportunity to really to bring something here that can make a huge difference and build relationship, the lower violence, build relationships between law enforcement and community that's in dire need, okay? And just plain and simple, save lives, okay? Corey Nance, David Wakes, Trey Sanders, Pharrell Sanders, and Duke Sanders are 2 brothers who got killed, who left a mother with 1 child left out of 3 sons that could have been stopped, who were great kids, who were honor roll kids, who were great kids, okay? Jamel Robbins, but also Jaheim Meredith, who just passed here this past May, who I believe that GBI could have helped and could have prevent that whole thing from happening, okay? And I just don't want this great opportunity that we have here to pass us by like so many others. Okay, we need the back and we need of course we need the budgeting and everything else, but I don't want to go out to the community again and say, hey, you can trust us, we're going to be here, and then next thing you know it fades away because not the right backing and not the money to go behind it. So I'm just saying here, please, let's do this, let's make this happen. We're going to save countless, who knows how much money we're going to save by saving lives. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left. Does anyone else like to speak? All right. Well, thank you. I guess that concludes that's part of our program here today.
That's
all, folks.
That's it.
We done for the
This
day?
hearing is
One more day done.
done.
One more day.